The Athletic.
A legend of Formula One has left us. Last night, the much-loved former F1 team boss and television pundit Eddie Jordan passed away after a battle with cancer. But what a legacy he's left and what memories he's created for millions of F1 fans. As the boss of the Jordan team, he was responsible for, amongst other things, giving Michael Schumacher his F1 debut in 1991. His team also delivered one of the most celebrated underdog victories in F1 history when Damon Hill led Ralf Schumacher home for an unlikely 1-2 in Belgium in 1998. But there was so much more to EJ than those standout memories. And joining me to pay tribute are first Jon Noble and then Gary Anderson. Well, Jon, we were in the Shanghai paddock today when news emerged that Eddie Jordan had passed away. He was the last of the truly successful independent Formula One team owners and certainly one of the most charismatic figures ever in Grand Prix racing. So how significant a figure was he?
I think very significant. I mean, he didn't achieve the success of someone like Ron Dennis and Frank Williams, even Ken Tyrrell. But I think you've got to put him in the same brackets in terms of the importance and value and kind of what they brought to Formula One and the impact they made. Because it was far-reaching. I think it goes beyond the fact that his team's morphed into Aston Martin. This was about, a truly independent person coming into the sport and making an impact that we still talk about today. Every year, for example, we will get questions about what was the best livery of all time, the most beautiful-looking car. What was it? 9 times out of 10, it's still that Jordan 191. We still remember that iconic moment. We still know where Michael Schumacher made his debut. He achieved success. They came close, fought for that championship. With Heinz-Harald Frentzen that year, didn't quite come off. But he's been there, and the last of the, I'd say, proper wheeler dealers in the paddock, where the deals were, pushing things around, and also a great deal of fun, mischievous, charismatic, funny. And never always willing to tell you your opinion, even if it was slightly different to what you felt it should be.
Well, that's the thing, wasn't it? Because he was this madcap character, this big character. He talked a big game, but he was one of the few that actually delivered on it. And many would just look at him and might not take him seriously. But he managed to achieve phenomenally well. You look at all those teams that came in that era. Very, very few of them even achieved modest success, let alone endured, let alone won races as that team did. And that's the remarkable thing about Eddie Jordan that I think makes him unique. He was an extreme character. He was quite happy to play the absurd character as well. He knew what he was doing, but he was a super serious entrepreneurial team owner as well.
Yeah, I think there was that. I think he sometimes played up to this character of being mischievous and a jester and a joker, but underneath it was a serious businessman, always up for a deal. And I think he thrived off doing deals and that bartering because of the love and joy of it. I know a story, I think from China, where you go to the market and you're buying stuff and haggling with people, and someone said he was haggling for this watch and just bringing the price down and refusing to stand and then walking away and coming back and getting the price down, and in the end paid full price for it. But he just loved that, the haggling and the deal making and trying to do it. So I think he got something for it, and I think he was like that in Formula 1 as well, doing deals with drivers, deals with sponsors, engine manufacturers, pulling it together, and it worked. He made a winning team. Not many people can claim to have made winning teams under their own name.
I think that's a remarkable thing. I mean, coming into Formula One with the Pepsi Co. backing the 7-Up livery on the car was remarkable for this sort of small team. Obviously had success in F3000, won the title with John Lacey, had success in British F3, won the title with Johnny Herbert, and also obviously Martin Brundle had that famous fight with Ayrton Senna in '84 for Eddie Jordan Racing. West Surrey Racing won it with Ayrton Senna. But what he combined was that ability to sort of smell the money and smell the deal. And I say smell the deal, but actually convince people that they want to do a deal and a sponsorship deal in Formula One, who probably had no possible imagination, no idea that they wanted to do that. He could sort of he could sell anything to anyone in that, but he combined that with real racing savvy and racing nous, didn't he? It wasn't you get a lot of people who've got one or the other, but he did actually bridge the divide, obviously, as a driver himself in his younger days.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the deals were done by being a bit cheeky. When he got the Ford name back into Formula One, he did do a Ford of Europe, but it was the Ford logo. It was important. He knew the value that would come, and I think that deal was created by him literally creating a mocked-up car with a big Ford logo and presenting it to Ford and saying, "This is what you need to be doing next year. This is the vision. This is everything," and taking a big gamble. And this is the way he was. He saw opportunity. He would chase it, and sure, he loved the smell of money and he loved a good deal. But deep down was a racer and someone who loved the racing and loved the politicking and loved the gossip in the paddock. Him and his close confidant Ian Phillips, they would sit in the motorhome, hatch these crazy stories, would give it to a soft journalist to say, "Oh, go and chase this one up," even though there was no truth in it. And then they would time how long it would take for someone else to come back and ask them if it was true or not, just because it was part of the fun of the paddock.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very, very different sort of time in that regard. But I think we should say what this team actually achieved. I mean, we'll speak to Gary Anderson shortly. The team was created out of nothing, really, and did phenomenally well straight away. That fifth in the Constructors' Championship in the first year in 91. They had to have the Yamaha engine deal that Bernie Eccleston put together because they needed that to survive. That was a works deal, not a good engine. But that at least meant that they could endure in Formula One and work through towards the Peugeot years, and then in 98 when they started to win with the Mugen Honda engine, then in 99 with Frentzen, those two wins. But I think that's what's phenomenal, isn't it? Not only survived, but actually thrived, and in many ways changed Formula One, didn't it? You think of some of those deals they did with the B&H deal and that kind of thing. Just I think Jordan Grand Prix did redefine somewhat what a Grand Prix team could be in terms of the wider public perception, in terms of how they conducted themselves. There's actually a little bit of the kind of the Red Bull to them, isn't there? The kind of counterculture team almost.
Yeah, and I think what's also important to say about it is this era of Formula One is different. There's a cost cap that teams can go to sponsors and go to backers, say this is the spending limit. We're on an even footing with what Ferrari can spend and Mercedes can spend and Red Bull can spend, and it makes things closer. He came through eras where the manufacturer had unlimited spending, where things were out of control. Teams would have qualifying cars and qualifying engines and be able to spend what they wanted on drivers and staff and factories and facilities and wind tunnels. And he still managed to win. And I think that says an awful lot, that in that era, being an independent team, battling against it all, and still coming out on top when you're going up against people with tons more money and better staff, just because he was sharper, played the game, understood things, and had that kind of raw racing spirit at the heart of it.
And that was, of course, the point where the team did decline, and there was sort of that slow slide from 99 because it was just very, very difficult with the amount of money being spent. The manufacturers just pouring money in. Formula One was changing into a full-on manufacturer in that period, but he also managed to sell the team, to get out. He ultimately made a lot of money from Formula One. And when you consider how many team bosses lost a lot of money, failed miserably, for him to have made money, succeeded, and created so many legendary stories, including that late win, the Giancarlo Fisichella victory at Interlagos in 2003, which of course typical of that team, came dressed up in all that drama of Raikkonen originally winning it, and then Fisichella getting the trophy on the start-finish straight at Imola a little bit later when they worked out exactly when the red flag was. So it's a phenomenal story from that regard of just absolutely beating Formula One almost. We recently had a question on the Bring Back V10's podcast that tells classic F1 stories from that era. And the question was, who was the greatest team principal of the Bring Back V10's era? And obviously there were some who achieved more, but I went with Eddie Jordan because he spanned the V10 era. He came in, did the impossible, got out, made a load of money off it. For me, he just completed Formula One effectively. Didn't win a championship, but did so much. And I think there's very few characters like that who have such a kind of coherent, fully realised story.
Yeah, I think it would be hard for anyone to to kind of repeat what he did and operate in the way he did it. I think it was just an era where you could do the deals and you could be smarter and cleverer and manoeuvre yourself around a paddock and sponsors and manufacturers and do stuff that stood out and was different. Because F1 was a bit less corporate then, a bit less sophisticated, a bit less of the, in the pre-Netflix era, there were very few personalities, and you had to kind of be elevated much higher to be seen from outside as someone big and someone, had this depth of character. And I think it said a lot. And he was, from a journalist perspective, it was amazing to work for because A, he was good for gossip. B, he knew an awful lot of what was going around the paddock, and also he wouldn't be afraid to give you a bollocking if he didn't. I recall once when Ralph Furman signed the deal to drive for the team. When I was at Autosport, he was determined that this should have been on the front cover. Basically, he wanted Ralph Furman on the front cover of Autosport. So I think we did an interview. And I think Furman wasn't the main image on the front cover in the end. They just decided to just put him on the strap at the top. My phone goes on Thursday and it's EJ screaming down the phone. Said, "You said it would be on the front cover." And I said, "He is on the front cover. He's there." "No, I meant the full thing. Call yourself an editor." And I said to him, I'm not the editor, EJ. I'm just the journalist." He said, "You're not the editor. What are you, a janitor?" Just screaming down the phone. And then he put the phone down, and they were all friends the next weekend. But they're just a good way to operate. That willing to get involved and speak his mind at times.
Well, and you're very much not embellishing that story because I was in the Autosport office that day and you played us a recording of it, so I can distinctly remember him accusing you of being the janitor. But yeah, very much a character. I think it's fair to say in the best possible way. Sometimes that's a bit of a euphemism for something else, but he really, really was. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Gary Anderson on a very sad occasion, obviously, because you were synonymous with Eddie Jordan. Obviously a great loss, a unique individual who you knew far better than most.
Yes, it is a great loss. I was quite surprised this morning when I got the news. It's I've known for sort of 9 months, to be honest. He was struggling a bit, and he we kept contact, kept texting each other back and forward. He was getting involved in a couple of little projects that he wanted me to look at, but they had to be sort of sidelined a little bit because of his illness. But over the last little while, the last couple of months, he became a bit quiet. So I did feel that maybe something was going on a bit more dramatic than he had explained to me. Because he was always one for keeping things to himself. That's one thing through our time together. Eddie, he was a private individual. He tried to keep himself to himself and live his life away from the spotlight. He enjoyed the spotlight, just the fact that he was such a character. But I can understand him trying to this past while has been tough for him. It's been tough for his family. It's been tough for all his friends who knew him well enough. So it's one of those sort of situations. Obviously, again, as I say, this morning was a bit of a shock in one hand, and on the other hand, it was something that I was over the last couple of months expecting to hear a bit more. It was a bit more dramatic than what we talked about at the end of last year.
I guess he's the kind of character you just expect him to keep pulling off the impossible, don't you? With how he lived his life, but it sounds like he was as far as he could still deal making and working as kind of late on as he could. But obviously, you wrote a wonderful tribute that ran on the race website, and you talked about first running into him in your F3 days when you were rival team bosses in '83. So your association goes all the way back then, some years before you worked together. So what do you remember of him in those early days?
Well, we went through the European Championship. It was a big thing in Formula 3 at that point in time. And we sort of ventured out of the UK to Europe, where there was lots of different car chassis, etc. And Eddie was running a Rolt, I was running the Anson, and it was great competition between the two teams. But we sort of lived, ate, and slept together. That was the big thing about it. I first met Eddie, I think, and Marie really in a bar one night whenever Zoe was first born. She was in a pushchair, I believe, at the time. So that's his eldest daughter, and it's just going through that period in time, the Formula 3, then Formula 3000, and then getting into Formula 1. I mean, he never forgot people. That was the thing about him. He always had this group of people that he never really forgot. He was always there. He'd always talk to you. He'd always, have a bit of a banter with you, abuse you. And during the Formula 3 days now, he was always after trying to nick your sponsorship. I mean, that was his claim to fame, was just, he was there to keep his team in survival. So, if you had a sponsor in your car, Eddie was never too shy to sort of go and introduce himself to them and try to drag some money out of them. Or even if your driver had a bit of money, he would be there lined up ready to take it away. But it's that's the way he was, and he never changed all the way through, even into Formula 1. He never changed. And when we got together, he gave me a massive opportunity in my life to design a Formula 1 car. And I'd never gone to that level. I designed Formula 3 cars, Formula 3000 car, which, is not similar to Formula 1 in those days. But it was a massive sort of like hurdle to step over, to accept the fact that you're designing a car to race against the likes of, Williams and McLaren and Ferrari. And, I thought whenever we were building the car that it would never see the light of day. It would always just be a project that died somewhere along the way. But Eddie was determined enough to make it happen, and did so.
Yeah, I think it's easy for people to forget now how improbable the whole Jordan story was, because as you say, there was really nothing there to start with. You started on the car project not with much realistic expectation that it would come to anything, and then somehow there you are, not only on the grid, not only qualifying for races, but also running what became an iconic car to fifth in the championship, which is a phenomenal story. And I guess impossible without Eddie Jordan's ability to do the impossible financially, which then allowed you to do, frankly, the impossible technically as well.
Yeah, I mean, Eddie's part of the thing was he was a wheeler dealer. He pulled together sponsorship from places that you would never imagine. Just to keep the thing alive, as in Australia at the end of 1991, we had decals on the rear wing end plates of the car, small decals, but one was a Chinese laundry who did our team gear washing, and one was an Italian takeaway who supplied us with pasta. So, it was one of these things where it was just such a small team. We didn't know anything. We went to our first race in Phoenix, for example. Marie was there making sandwiches. Marie and my wife were the ones that sort of catered for us, I think you might call it, in Phoenix. It was the first time, I think, in weeks that Eddie had actually slept. We'd got to the first race. There was a bit of money in the bank to go racing with. And I remember Eddie lying down in the sort of motorhome area that we had, just exhausted for like 24 hours. So, he'd put his life and soul into it, as all of us had done. But he was so committed to making it happen. Then after you make it happen, it's about trying to get it as successful as possible. And, in those days, there was the big four teams. And to finish fifth in the championship, just nipping at their heels, was something, I think, it was fairly credible. And I think it taught people that were trying to come into Formula 1 that if you tried hard enough, you could do it. It wasn't just about being there and hoping that it would happen. You had to make it happen. And I think that's one thing that Eddie did. He went out, ducked and dived, got the money together to do it. We as a team of people behind him were motivated by him, and we put our best efforts in to try to build a car that was, it wasn't going to be the fastest car in the world, but I wanted to build a car that we understood, and so we could go to race meetings and go through pre-qualifying and get the best out of it every weekend if possible, because that's all we could do. We weren't good enough, clever enough, big enough, or financed well enough to actually take on the big boys. But for sure, when you got one over the big boys, it was a pretty good day.
But what's it like working with somebody like Eddie Jordan? I guess obviously he's out there putting it on the line every day to get the money in, to make the team work. So that makes it easier for you to and your team to put the enormous amount of effort in required to design, develop the car and run it, particularly in the difficult times when obviously you had to have the Yamaha engines in 92 to make the team financially viable, but that meant that competitively you were more than on the back foot, but you knew there was always this kind of battle going on, and EJ would always give you the most he possibly could to actually do what he needed to do.
Yeah, it was good because I think we understood each other. I knew that the budgets weren't huge, so we had to do everything as cost effective as possible. That wasn't to say we had to cut short anything. And the big problem, I suppose, was in 1991 we didn't know any more than we did. We got into Formula One and we did the best job we could in 1991, and we had some lucky results, but we had some good results. Montreal and Mexico, I think, were two examples of good results. We got there because other people didn't. But that's okay, because that's what racing's about as well. In those days, reliability was very important. We were competitive in the first 4 races of the season, even the first 5, I think you could call it. But we had reliability issues. Strange things happened, throttle cable in Monaco, a gear linkage system in Imola, so on and so forth. But, you have to fight your way through all that sort of stuff, and you can get disappointed and depressed about it. But on the way there, we were quite decent as far as performance was concerned. So we knew if we could get on top of the reliability issues, we would have something half decent. And Eddie was willing to sort of back that all up and be there. Nobody wanted the cars not to finish races. But at the end of the day, he knew that the pain we were going through was just as much as the pain as he was going through. So he was good for the people. He was a motivator. He always seen past the difficult bits, I suppose you might call it. He always tried to find solutions to work with you to find the best way out of it all. But as you say, going end of 1991, going into 1992, we were financially fairly strapped, and 2 things happened there. The Yamaha deal coming along was very important for the survival of the company, and also Sasol. Sasol was a good sponsor, and came in at the right time. So it was one of those sort of situations where Eddie never really downloaded the financial pressures onto me, but whenever we talked about doing something, he'd always try and make sure that I was spending the money wisely. And if I said it was, this is the best we can do for the money we've got, he was very happy to accept that. He wouldn't dig in behind you and try and undermine you or anything like that, which gave you confidence and just to try to get on and do the best you could for the least you could spend. And that's how the company operated for quite a few years.
But there were, of course, obviously times when, you're a strong character, he's a strong character. So there were some disagreements along the way as well, weren't there? And you've told some good stories of moments when things got a little bit fraught. Obviously, always came back together after it. But it seems like a very lively environment, but in a good way, in that you kind of need that edge in the individuals who are trying to drive things on. And inevitably, there'll be moments of friction like that.
Yeah, it always will be. I mean, it's not a marriage made in heaven. Nothing ever is. We've all got our ways of doing things. We'll always fight for our little corner. And again, Eddie was the same. There was people brought into the company that I might not have agreed with at times, but Eddie saw it as a necessity. Some of them lasted for a while. Some of them didn't last very long. What we tried to do as Jordan Grand Prix, I suppose, was to use it as the I suppose you call it the Jordan School of Motoring. We wanted young drivers. We wanted people who would come in as mechanics, etc., engineers, designers, that would learn to do things our way, not come in and say, oh well, we did this X, Y, Z at such and such, and that includes drivers. So initially we were all about trying to find that young superstar, and that's something that Eddie was very good at, spotting talent and working out a way where he might make a few bob out of it in the longer term. And I think that's what's missing right now. We don't get that anymore. It needs to be a bit more. I think Formula One needs to be a bit more like a Premiership. There's some interest in a team bringing in a young driver fairly cheaply and trying to get them the experience driving for the team and get them to a level where they're competitive, and then sell them on. And, Eddie did that with quite a few drivers through his time. So at the end of the day, I think that was where Eddie really excelled. finding the talent, bringing them in, and wheeling and dealing a little bit with everybody to try to get, have drivers have a better opportunity, because, no matter what, we weren't going to be a Grand Prix championship winning team. We were always going to be fighting to get the best result possible on a Sunday afternoon. But we weren't going to be fighting for a championship very early in our early days. So doing the best job we could was exactly what we tried to achieve, rather than being upset because we didn't achieve something. So yeah, it was a pleasure to work with him. We had our ups and downs, as you know, and I moved on in 1998 after a bad start to the season. But, it's one of those sort of situations where I didn't move on because of Eddie. I moved on because of the other management group around the company that couldn't see the big picture. We just changed engines for the umpteenth time as a company. We'd gone from a Peugeot engine that had a lot of, quite good power characteristics to a Honda engine which was lacking power. We had a big regulation change in the regulations for that year, narrow track, etc., groove tyres, and we didn't get it quite right. But it wasn't a mistake. We didn't build a bad car. We made a mistake on the car. But, Eddie understood that, but he was getting pressure from all sorts of people, and sponsors included. And, things had to change a little bit. But I never lost the respect for Eddie because of that, and I don't think he ever lost the respect for me. And I went back there again. So it's one of those sort of situations. I think him from the south of Ireland, me from the north of Ireland, the two of us met up at the border, and we were happy to, look after our own part of the company and try to do the best job we could.
Yeah, that clearly worked very, very well. As you said, you went back, had that amazing victory at Interlagos in 2003, which probably was pretty significant in helping that team in the kind of declining years. And certainly, well, I know you probably won't like me saying it, but Eddie Jordan himself would call you a genius. Basically, he spoke very, very highly of you. So I do see you as kind of you and his as a kind of one of those great F1 partnerships. As you said, you've got the kind of commercial team boss and a technical boss. So it seems like one of those relationships that just happen to work very, very well.
Yeah, I think it did work well. I was sad to leave Jordan Grand Prix because I'd built it up to what it, in 1998. I'd sort of built it up to what it was. And we were at a crossroads, really, at that point in time, where, we had 97 was a good year, and we had high hopes for 98, but it started wrong. And we needed to get on top of the situation. And it was one of those sort of things I was really sad to leave it, but the way things went, it was very, very difficult to get the confidence, I think, in the rest of the management that you were heading in the right direction. We had instigated some changes in the car once we realised what the problem was, and they came along at the British Grand Prix, and they did do what it said on the tin. They did change the balance of the car significantly to allow the drivers to understand the car a bit more, and then to be able to optimise the setup around that car understanding. But it was one of those sort of situations where leaving the company and going away from it was something that it destroyed me really for a while. But, then when Eddie contacted me again to see if I would be interested in coming back again, I knew that, at the end of the day, we could still work together and try and achieve a goal. It was one of those sort of things where, the 2003 result in Brazil was, you could call it a bit lucky, but we were always good at throwing out the gauntlet and seeing what would happen. And that was one of those races where, we tried to do something, and it paid off in the long term. On the way there, it was pretty fraught, trying to make the right decisions, but we got there somehow. And as I say, it was Jordan's last Grand Prix. And I also sort of helped a bit with, after I'd moved on from Jordan and sort of semi-retired, I was helping with the Lara, the Midland project. And it was through saying to the Midland guys, like, why are you trying to build this car? Why don't you speak to Eddie Jordan? He's got a team, he's financially struggling a bit. Why don't you give him a call and see? And they did. And sort of, hopefully, I helped start Jordan Grand Prix, and hopefully I helped Jordan Grand Prix to be sold. So it sort of bookended both sides of the Jordan Grand Prix story, which made me feel decent because, Eddie and I never lost our relationship. I mean, up to 2 months ago, we were texting each other quite often. But I knew, as I say, 2 months ago that things were probably turning in the wrong direction because he started to not really answer my texts in detail anymore. And I knew that that's not the way he works. So, sad day today, I'm afraid, but, we're all using up that one-way ticket. And the only difference is the length of the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people can just leave behind an amazing legacy. And I think with the outpouring of emotion and tributes to him, I think it says a lot about the impact that EJ has had both on those who work with him and just on fans worldwide who enjoy the exploits of Jordan Grand Prix that obviously Eddie was central to, and you were as well. So thank you very much for your memories of working with EJ. Obviously, we could probably speak for hours about all the stories, but it's great to get a little bit of insight into the reality of working with a true F1 legend. So thank you, Gary. Well, overall, John, how will you look back on EJ? Is it as someone you dealt with personally, who called you the janitor, who you just enjoyed some back and forth with, or do you think does he have that kind of extra aura? Is he there with the Frank Williamses, the Ron Dennises, these great team bosses, or is he something unique?
I would put him in terms of a great of that era, but kind of the definition of great slightly different. As I said earlier, it's not from the success of winning multiple championships and defining success over a long period. But I think he was an important part of Formula One. I think he helped shape Formula One in some respects in being this independent who became successful and could win, being at the heart of the paddock, being someone that people looked to, and he kept everyone sharp on their toes, because if someone left a deal out there to be grabbed, tiniest sniff of it, he would chase it and be there like a terrier trying to snatch this stuff away from people. So I think he was a great in a specific era, basically, and I think Formula One would be a poorer place if Eddie Jordan hadn't been a part of it.
I'd certainly agree with that, and of course he stayed involved after he sold the team to Midland. It competed as Jordan for its last year in 2005, but he'd sold it, I think, February of that year to Alex Schneider, wasn't it, who bought it. And then it went Midland, Spike, Force India, Racing Point. Now it's Aston Martin. But he stayed involved, BBC pundit, Channel 4 pundit, the Formula for Success podcast he'd done in recent years as well, and Adrian Newey management. He was involved in that Aston Martin deal, so still wheeling and dealing. He still did have his finger on the pulse, and he would sometimes in his punditry kind of throw in little interesting grenades that were more his opinion, but then sometimes he'd just have great just news stories, wouldn't he? Yeah,
I think he, even if he stepped outside the paddock, he still had his kind of ears to the ground and would still be well aware of doing stuff. And I think we're all guilty of it sometimes, that we kind of get sniffs of things in the paddock and you don't chase it hard enough, and then someone else beats you to the story sometimes. I think EJ just had that habit of getting the sniff of something, whether it was a deal and a sponsor in his period, and pulling it, or the sniff of a story and still being the one that wanted to break it. I think he was he pretty much first to get the Schumacher back to Formula One Mercedes story at the time, just been the first one. I know it'd been rumoured stuff, but definitive that this is happening. So, snatching stuff away from people and still being at the heart of understanding how things are and where things were. And obviously he had the phone numbers of everybody.
Absolutely, and just played a big part in so many careers as well. He had that reputation as a talent spotter. Obviously, in Formula One, drivers like Michael Schumacher, the most famous one, lived to slightly regret the vague terms of the contract that had been signed. Lost him to Benetton because it wasn't precise enough. But he never made that mistake again, did he? And all of these great drivers that came through: Rubens Barrichello, Eddie Irvine, obviously, who he managed to convince Ferrari they wanted and made a huge amount of money off selling him to Ferrari basically in 96, when nobody was thinking that he was an obvious driver. And then the Damon Hill deal was hugely popular, bringing Ralf Schumacher into Formula One. Giancarlo Fisichella, his first full-time drive in 97. Just so many drivers went through that team, and he has sort of shaped Formula One in that regard as well.
Yeah, I remember the Irvine story. I was working with a Daily Telegraph's F1 correspondent, Timothy Collins, back then, who'd heard that Irvine could potentially be going to Ferrari, and EJ was getting involved. And I remember this was the days of fax machines, and Jordan's press release came out saying Irvine has signed a new, whatever it was, 1 year or 2 year contract. And Timmy saw it, said, right, he's going to Ferrari. This is EJ's way of saying the price has just gone up massively, because everyone knew that EJ was up for a deal.
Yeah, well, that's just a great example of it. And if you listen to the podcast I mentioned before, Bring Back V10s, telling classic F1 stories, there are so many of these EJ tales woven throughout it. And I think it says a lot about his role in Formula One, that even at times when the team was on a bit of a downturn, he's still there in the centre of the narrative, doing things, making things happen, saying things, and in many ways transcending Formula One, because he did have some profile outside of the world of Formula One motorsport as well, through some of his TV ventures in particular later. So a phenomenal character, and it's often standard to say we won't see their like again, but it is impossible to see another Eddie Jordan type character, even one that's kind of adjusted for the modern F1 world. It just doesn't really work anymore. You can't operate in that way in the more corporate world.
No, and I still think that the very fact that 7-Up sponsorship, a beautiful Jordan 191, Michael Schumacher, all in the space of one season, and it will forever be a beautiful car that potentially could have won a race that year. Not impossible scenario for that to have been winning races for a team in its first year. I think it's something that will stand forever, and people beyond us will be asked in many, many years what is the most beautiful F1 car there ever was, and people probably not even born in 1991 or aware of it will go the Jordan 191, just because I think just made such an impact as your debut season in F1, and that's everything about EJ doing special things.
Absolutely, and it had to be successful as well as looking good, didn't it? It needed to be quick, and it certainly was. Like you say, Spa that year could well have won. De Cesaris was chasing down Ayrton Senna, who was having gearbox troubles, and they'd made a change on the Ford engine that just meant the oil consumption was up, which they hadn't communicated, and De Cesaris had the failure, so could have been very, very different. But yeah, will be sorely missed, and just the reaction from people in the Shanghai paddock today, we heard, universally respected, you can certainly say, and a very, very popular character, and I'm sure that's the same for many of you listening to this. So I'm pleased we've been able to get together and at least do a short tribute to Eddie Jordan. I'm sure many others will do the same, and everyone will be reading lots and listening to lots and watching lots about him in the coming days, and rightly so, because he was a true legend of Formula One.
The Athletic.